Welcome to the wonderful world of wine. We are your hosts, Mark Lindsay and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. You can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine, and you can also follow our older episodes on iTunes. Hello, everyone. Every week, Kim and I get together with you and discuss the latest news and information we find on the internet in the wine world. And a lot of times, I don't know if listeners know this, Kim, but we do every day on our Facebook page post a daily newsletter, and we also post a weekly newsletter. Then we take that content and pick topics to discuss with our listeners. So that is the basis of our show. We love to start the shows with, what did we Google this week? So, Kim, what did you Google this week?
So what I Googled this week, I was looking up information on a certain winemaker who is sort of one of the founding fathers of Napa Valley winemaking. The gentleman's name is Warren Winiarski. He's actually still alive. He's about 92 years old these days. And he was an immigrant from Europe, and he came over to the U.S. early in the 20th century. He was a young man, kind of in the 1930s, 1940s, and was really one of the winemakers that really kicked off California's modern wine industry in the 1950s and 1960s. He worked for Mondavi for a couple of years. He worked for Souverain for a few years, and eventually became the winemaker at Stag's Leap, which won all sorts of awards, and the most famous one being the Judgment of Paris tasting in 1976 in Paris, where a number of American wines went up against a number of French wines, and they were all tasted blind, meaning that the judges did not know what they were tasting, and the American wines came out on top. So that sort of sent shockwaves through the wine world and really introduced American wines as being able to compete on a world stage. So I just wanted to know a little bit more information about him for one of my classes, and that is what I Googled this week. What did you Google this week, Mark?
That was interesting.
Yeah,
history,
he's a cool guy.
And very well-known person in the wine world.
Indeed.
Well, Kim, we've been studying Spain, as we've been telling our listeners the past few weeks, and in one of our lectures, there was a mention of Roman aqueducts, and I was just amazed. You saw these 3-4-story structures where the Romans built these things for transportation and storage of water. So I was just curious if any information, if they were used in any way for the vines, for winemaking. I couldn't really find anything of how it was used, but I did find a stat that said they were used up until the 1920s.
So you were looking for them for sort of like irrigation purposes?
Yeah. Were they
Was
drawing? Was it just for everyday living and removal of waste, I would assume? Or
no, just water.
Just water?
Only used for drinking water.
The levels. It was amazing construction. If people haven't seen it, just Google Roman aqueducts. Some of them are up to 40 miles long, and it's just amazing the things that the Romans did, other than give us great wine, right? Winemaking.
And they're all over Europe, all over Southern Europe, wherever the Romans went. They brought their technology with them. So you can see them in Southern France. You see them in Spain. There are really cool ones in the Rhone Valley, which I've seen quite a few of as well.
Our first article today we want to discuss with you is from Decanter magazine. It's Are You a Label Drinker? And Kim, you know me, I get excited when I see any article that mentions labels. And Decanter, right away, they were saying kind of wanted to separate themselves for the person who's just drinking a wine and posting it. But it was all about social media and how it's turning people into label drinkers. So I'm curious your interpretation of the article.
Yeah, I immediately latched onto the sort of the Instagramming of bottle shots and glasses shots. And it has immediately brought to mind for myself when I started my Instagram account for my company a couple of years ago and trying to figure out okay, what do I want to post? Like what makes sense as a wine professional, as someone who does wine tastings and wine events and wine classes? What do people want? What are people going to find interesting that I'm going to post on Instagram? So I went in and I looked at a whole bunch of other accounts that focus on wine, and it's all just a bottle in a glass and a bottle in a glass and a bottle bottle in a glass. I'm like, God, this is so boring. It's like people just sort of showing off, this is the bottle of wine that I had tonight. And it's really this idea of tying, like, I'm super special because I'm drinking this either hard to get wine or this expensive wine or this prestigious wine. And I feel like it gets really tiring really fast. And maybe that's because I don't buy this way, because I have all that underlying wine knowledge and I know how to find a good bottle that isn't one of these flashy, prestigious wines. But it really did get me thinking about the whole idea of wine, showing off what wine you're drinking and how that reflects back on yourself.
Yeah, I like how they looked at the social media aspect. And my take on it, I feel, was they were saying people like to brag when they're tasting like phenomenal, very rare wines, and they'll take a picture of it. I know you and I probably do the same thing. You go to a tasting, it's something, it's once in a lifetime wine, so you want to show everyone, brag to your friends. Look what I tried tonight. You take a picture. But I think also there's people that are just their everyday wine. So I was having a hard time separating what they were trying to say to the decanter reader. Because to me, decanter is like an elite, maybe group of drinkers. It's UK based, right? So
yeah,
what are they trying to get around and saying? That this is bad that people post? Is it too much being posted?
I think that they're saying that it's very showy. It's the image that matters and not necessarily what is in the bottle. If you're posting something that is sort of self-promotional, because that is a lot of what Instagram is all about, and a lot of social media is sort of either selling your brand or selling yourself, really. You're showing wine as this idea of something that has status. And if you can show that you are into these status symbol kind of things, like fine wine, like hard to find wines or expensive wines, then you're saying something about yourself.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. It's kind of the showy aspect of it.
And they were saying, are you a labeled drinker? To me now, can you separate people that are buying based on a label versus people that are posting labels? In other words, if I'm a shopper and I'm buying a label, wine, based on the label, will I be the person that's posting that, or am I just the buyer that's buying based on the label?
I think it can be both. Might be just someone who is consuming the images online and not necessarily drinking those wines, or you could be using that as, oh, well, now I've seen that such and such a person posted this. I'm going to go out and see if it's something that I can find. And in that case, you would be the label buyer.
It's all great for wine. I mean, anything you see in mass market, I mean, we're seeing all sorts of brands that are posting all sorts of things of the bottle image.
And this isn't new. It's a new, yes, social media is new, but the idea of wines as having status symbol, and then therefore being a status symbol, and therefore other people are going to want to consume those because they have this idea attached to them of either luxury or relaxation, I suppose. You're wanting to wear a nice watch and drive a fancy car and drink the best wines. This is not a new phenomenon. But, there was this twist at the end of the article where if you're only buying wines because other people are telling you that these are the fancy ones you should be buying, then you're not necessarily relying on your own tastes and your own opinions and your own experiences. So they sort of double back at the end and be like, you should just trust yourself. But it's hard to know how to trust yourself if you don't know what good wine is or what good wine tastes like. So it is sort of this catch-22.
That's a good point, because a lot of times for marketing, I will put out a picture of a wine, this is new. And then I at first, when I was doing social media like that, I was getting a lot of feedback. What does it taste like? And I'm thinking, oh yeah, I tasted it.
Yeah.
But I show the picture. I haven't told you a thing about it other than it's a pretty label and I have it. So I think that's key, that when you do a picture like that, or if people are drinking something you really like it, say, why did you like it? Right? It's a nice label, but why should I go buy it? Right?
And I think sometimes people get caught up in the idea of, well, this other person is telling me that this wine is the best, therefore I should like it. And this is an issue that comes into play when you're talking about scores. And this particular wine, say, got 94 points from whoever publication. Yes, that might be a high scoring wine, but that you understand and know the criteria with which that wine is judged. That might not be a style that you like, and you might taste it and be like, oh, there's something wrong with me because I don't like this 94 scoring wine. That is not the case at all. You just might have a different palate or different experience than the person who is doing that judging. So sometimes I feel like people are a little bit led astray because they feel like, oh, maybe nothing under an 80 whatever is a good wine, and I'm assuming that every wine that has a 90 or 90 plus score is automatically going to be good. Well, yeah, quality wise, it probably is technically very good, but that doesn't say anything about whether you're going to like it or not.
So as a wine drinker, Kim, forget the educator, the geek, what do you like to see on your social media feeds? You see a picture of a wine. What's your thoughts when you see from friends or family?
I'm still trying to figure out what is appealing to me and what I like. I think it's tricky with social media because it's not necessarily telling you that much about the wine. It's all the image. Okay, there's this wonderful wine with this beautiful plate of food in this beautiful location, whether it's an island or whether it's Italy or someplace that gives you an idea of, hey, don't you want to be here? And don't you want to be involved in this? And I think part of that is associating the wine with the experience. And, it almost is kind of saying like, you can have a little bit of this experience just by drinking this wine. You might not be eating it with the same food. You might not be in this same location, but it's almost like this little, hey, your vacation in a glass is right here. So I think it's hard because it's not just a wine review. It's not a wine tasting note. It's not giving you information about the wine. It's more, how does this wine tie into an experience? And I think that that's what most people are looking for when they're sort of consuming but not consuming, when they're looking at food feeds and beverage feeds and things on social media. It's not necessarily about, does this taste good? And it's more about I think, conspicuous consumption and the use of social media as experience.
Well, if you're posting that, you assume people that are following you understand you like wine or you taste wine, you drink wine. So, I mean, we're obviously following the same group of people. I think a lot of times when I see it, sometimes I get mad. I'm like, how did they find that wine? Or how did I not know about that wine and they have it? And where'd you get it? Why?
And sometimes for me, it's the sheer quantity too. It's like, oh, I want to be at that tasting, or I want to be at that location, or oh my goodness, look at all that champagne. And you're in a cellar somewhere and you're so lucky, like I wish I could be there. So I think there's a little bit of envy that plays into that too. It's like, look where I am, look what I'm doing. Don't you wish you could be doing this too? So there's a bit of sort of that one-upmanship, I think, with social media and with wine. So I think it's complicated. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why I have a hard time trying to figure out what I'm going to post on my Instagram, because I don't know what people want to see. And I'm a little unclear about what I want to see too. So yeah,
well,
it's
the
tricky.
article,
it's a work in progress.
The article was asking, are you a labeled drinker? So really we are. Because we always thinking about, we've tasted it, should we share it?
We're label drinkers, but we understand
for promotional purposes, for educational purposes.
Right.
So I guess...
But then on another hand, we're not label drinkers, because we can look at a label of something that we've never heard of before, and we don't know, it's not got all this press, and it's not considered high prestige sort of stuff. But if we look at it, we're like, oh yeah, Reserva Rioja from whatever vintage, I'm gonna buy that. I bet that's excellent. And we can do that too. And I think that's the antithesis of this label drinker thing.
But if you didn't like it, right, you wouldn't be taking a picture and sharing it with your friends.
No,
right?
But that's not the label. That's I'm appreciating what's in the bottle, which I think is fundamentally different from what they're talking about here.
Yeah,
and they're saying, their definition of what is a label drinker is somebody with more money than experience, and we have more experience than money. So we're the opposite side.
That's for sure.
You're listening to The Wonderful World of Wine. We are your hosts, Mark and Kim. You can find out more information about myself at my website, vinitaswineworks.com, and more information about Mark at franklinliquors.com. So we often talk about articles from Forbes magazine, and one of my favorite wine writers and wine thinkers is Kathy Hoyha, and she did an article about successful trends and unsuccessful trends that she has seen over the course of the past year in her article articles and in the educational things that she does. So we wanted to talk about a few of those that look like they're on people's radars for current trends and then things that will continue in the future.
Yeah, Kim, and our listeners may remember a past episode, because we're always using Kathy's articles. We had a discussion. We felt bad. We didn't know the pronunciation of her name. And you reached out to her, which I'm so happy you did.
Yeah, I sent her a message and I'm like, just got to ask, because we talk about your articles on the radio. How do you pronounce your last name? I was a little embarrassed that I had to reach out and do that, but she wrote me back immediately, and I'm very grateful that she and I are having an ongoing conversation over social media. So thank you, Kathy.
Yeah, and we're working to bring her as a guest on one of our shows, too. So she has a very interesting career and background, so we'll have her soon, hopefully.
Right, we'll talk about that at another time. So for some successful trends that she has found, and she writes for Forbes, so her audience may be a little different than, say, our audience. So folks that are in tune with more financial matters and may have different ideas of where their wine buying may be. But she said
Kim.
There you go, more than mine. But she said one of the really important things that she has been looking into this year is the concept of diversity. So bringing more voices of women in the wine industry to the forefront, as well as ethnic minorities that are an important part of our industry and haven't necessarily always gotten a platform with which to speak from. So the idea of including those voices is very important. So she is seeing this trend as something that is ongoing, and I think we're all the better for it.
Yeah, the diversity. Lately, this has been huge in the news. Women, and they just did a report just recently about beer making, and if a woman was associated, did you see it? Mm-hmm. If a woman's associated with a brewery, then people tend to not want to be interested in it. So I've seen a lot, and I know you're involved in a lot of women's groups in the industry, Kim, but I've seen more and more with this symposiums about getting women more involved and more out there and be known in the industry. So I think that's great. There's more women winemakers. Mm-hmm. We always talk about women in the industry with jobs and moms.
There are more women graduating from UC Davis as winemakers, as scientists. I know a lot of women scientists in the industry, so we're not going away. This is something that is going to continue.
And she also mentioned about, as a wine community, talking about diverse as far as the African American community. And I thought this was a great thing to bring up because, and I was thinking, a lot of times when you do a survey or when you're tasting wine, it'll ask you male, female, in your age, but they never separate by African American or Caucasian or anything like that. So I thought it was interesting. There's a lot of consumers that are African American, but there's no targeting, no data collection of how we can gather marketing that.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yep. And there are some groups and some folks on Instagram that I follow that are either Black winemakers or Black wine marketers. And I really love to follow the things that they post because there are different ways of talking to different communities and making sure that you're hitting all the right notes that people want to hear. And I feel like making sure that everyone feels included in the wine experience, regardless of what their ethnic background is, regardless of where they grew up. I think that's important. And we feel like wine is something that has this community, convivial aspect to it, especially for those of us that feel like wine as part of a meal is important. I feel like it should open doors and open communication from people and not make people feel excluded. So I love that there is this conversation going on. So again, more of that.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. So second topic was the idea of talking about government intervention when it comes to the wine industry. So whether it be laws or taxes, a lot of this revolves around direct shipping. And direct shipping is a topic that we have been talking about for years because every state is different as far as its laws go. So it's like we've got 50 little countries when you're talking about U.S. wine laws, but then there are some overarching federal laws that have to be taken into consideration too. So there's a lot of that going on. I think this is a little more focused towards that Forbes audience who might be a little bit more savvy when it comes to the ideas behind taxation and other governmental oversight of the money side of wine. But I do find that this to be something very interesting. And she kind of made a little side note on this one as well, that investing in wine is also a topic of conversation that her audience is interested in. So I think these two sort of play together.
Yeah, exactly. exactly what I take was it was all tax based, and a lot of the laws had changed, were benefiting more the wineries, more in the local level, more distributors, where taxes were affecting salespeople were paying more, but the corporations got more back. So and we talk a lot about the government thing as far as shipping laws that are changing, and then as a nation, we look at tariffs now. The government's putting in, sending wines to China. They want to tax that wine coming from Mexico. They're talking about. So there will be some true effects. And I think what she was saying here is things are happening a lot of people don't know about that's putting money in certain people's pockets. So that's something you always have to watch in the wine
And
world.
especially with talking about tariffs, and you're talking about trade deals, and you're talking about taxes. Those are costs that are passed on to the consumer, but that you don't necessarily know about. They are incorporated into the cost of a bottle of wine. So you might see the bottle of wine that you regularly buy going up in price, and you might automatically blame the retailer and say, hey, why are you raising the price of the bottle of wine that I've always been buying? Might not be that retailer's fault or decision, or they might not have anything to do with it. There may be these additional costs that are being put on it 5 steps ago that you don't have any idea about, and that your friendly local wine shop has no control over.
Federal taxes,
Taxes,
shipping
taxes.
taxes, many things involved with that. What was the next one, Kim? She was saying fourth
Was
thing.
specific grape varieties, that people are interested in talking about specific grapes, which I love talking about specific grapes. So
We talk about all the time.
Happy. Yeah. So people are curious, and people are interested in either hearing about their favorite grape varieties or interested in new things that are out there. And there are a lot of grape varieties. There's a lot of wine styles. It's fun. It's interesting, and it keeps people curious. And I think that that is wonderful.
We've been talking about this so many times recently. The trend is different things. There's so much out there. Try different things. We base all classes in education about this. You know, it's not just about Chardonnay. There's so much more out there. So to me, this was one of the more obvious of the 4 on the list. I thought, yeah, I mean, we've known this for a while, right?
But then the flip side of this is, all right, well, what topics are not as successful? And some of these sort of surprised me, because they were things that I kind of always have in the back of my mind when it comes to promotion and when it comes to marketing. And when you think, especially along the lines of like social media marketing, and, you know, social media marketers often are like, come up with something cute like a Wine Wednesday recommendation, or travel is big, or talking about seasonal wines. And those are things that she said were really not successful, and that people either didn't click on the articles, or there was much less of a show of interest in those things. So seasonal wine suggestions, she's kind of said, yeah, nope. Recommendations along the lines of like Tuesday night wines or Wine Wednesday kind of things. A lot of travel things around hot bars and restaurants, she said, didn't really gain a lot of traction. And then what was the last one? Do you remember what the last one that she said was?
I don't remember, because I was focused on the social media thing.
Oh, okay.
I thought it was just so interesting that, you know, people are always trying to. This is not a day that goes by that's not something related. It's this day. It's Wine Day. It's World Wine Day. It's National Wine Day. And to hear that that's not really working. So, but they keep coming up with more and more.
But that's kind of refreshing for me, because then I'm like, oh, good, I don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah.
You know? Oh, I remember what the last one was. It was that people are either not interested or maybe don't understand about all the wine classifications. So whether you're talking about AOCs in France, or the AOP designation, which is the new umbrella term that the EU has imposed over all of their member countries. We're starting to see that more and more on French labels, that winemakers are now putting AOP instead of AOC. And I don't think that that's anything that most people really know or understand, but maybe especially American wine drinkers are just not interested.
Yeah, so, I mean, she's saying the geeky stuff isn't working. And
yeah, and that's, you know, we like the geeky stuff, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's for everybody.
You're listening to The Wonderful World of Wine, and we are your hosts, Mark Lindsay and Kim Simone. If you'd like to get more information about Kim, please visit her website at VinitasWineworks.com. If you'd like to get more information about myself, please go to FranklinLiquors.com. If you'd like to follow past episodes of our show, please find us on iTunes or SoundCloud. Our next article is from VinePair, Best Low Alcohol Wine Brands. And when we looked at this article, Kim said she had an issue with it, and I always like that, because I always want to find out if we have the same issue.
Yeah.
So
I kind of had a beef with this article. I kind of felt like this was going to be something different than what it actually turned out. So they said, all right, best low alcohol wine brands. Like, oh, yeah, okay. So let's talk about some wines that are below what we normally consider to be quote unquote normal alcohol levels. And when I think of normal alcohol levels, I think 11, 12, 13% for whites and anywhere from 12 to say 14 for reds. So I was thinking this article was going to be about like 8, 9, 10% alcohol in wines that are regular brands that are not these manipulated diet kinds of wines where they're put through all sorts of chemical changes in order to remove some of the alcohol. But it's really not. They were defining low alcohol as right around 12% or a little bit under for whites and 13% or under for reds. I'm like, that's a typical bottle of Bordeaux is 12.5%. So I don't really know why they were settling on that amount of alcohol by volume as their threshold for a low alcohol wine. That for me is a typical wine, not a low alcohol wine.
Yeah, and they said about brands, so I was thinking they're going to label
but
wineries
they
or
didn't.
something.
They
no
did
brands
styles.
were mentioned. Styles, yeah.
They did more styles, not brands.
And they mentioned, they started off, it was all about the alcohol content, saying it's between 5 and 20%. But like you said, Kim, under 13% for red. I'm like, 13 is high.
Yeah.
Right? So
I think 13 is typical. I think 13 is typical.
But I wouldn't consider that low alcohol.
Absolutely not.
Right?
And I have a note for myself that I wrote down and I said, what about good wines under 10%? Like that kind of what I was hoping that they would give us. Because I was like, oh, this is stuff that I don't have information about and questions that I get from people. And I was hoping that this would be a great resource for me. And I was a little disappointed.
And they weren't comparing, no mention of low alcohol versus healthy. We're not talking healthy wines or fit wines. We're talking about just low alcohol volume, right?
Right.
And I've heard stories of stores or places or restaurants that will not carry wines over a certain percentage of alcohol. So I was kind of thinking when someone says low alcohol and what they're looking for, is it based on too much fruit or you know what I mean? What are they basing? Why would you want this?
Yeah. I mean, for me, the taste of it comes down to is more important than how high is the alcohol. So if I have a 13% alcohol that tastes unbalanced and boozy, I would rather drink something that's 15% and tastes in balance than 13% and tastes out of balance. So the flavor of the wine and the feel of it as it all comes together in your mouth, for me, is way more important than what is that actual alcohol by volume level in there. So they really sort of broke down their sort of cheat sheet about how to find wines that are lower in alcohol into, well, if it's from a cooler climate, then therefore it will generally be lower in alcohol, which I do find to be true. If you're talking about wines from Australia, California, the very south of Italy, those are really hot places that get super ripe grapes, and super ripe grapes translate into wines with higher alcohol because those grapes have more sugar in them. And if you have more sugar in your grapes and you ferment them out fully to have a dry wine, you are therefore, just because of chemistry, going to have more alcohol in those wines. So their recommendation is cooler climates are going to produce grapes that are less ripe, so therefore less potential alcohol and less final alcohol in the wine. So talked about German Rieslings, and they talked about Chablis, and they talked about Vinho Verde, which is specifically made to be a little bit lower in alcohol. Those are those wines from Portugal. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, we always
I kind of scratched my head with it.
Yeah, we've always talked with the listeners about, the hot zones, the cold zones, and how it affects the alcohol. They also mentioned there is a law on the percentage where 14% or lower, you can have a 1.5% difference in the alcohol. So that might be why they started at 13. So it could be 12.5 or 12% technically. But when you're talking about alcohol and tasting, Kim, have you ever tried a wine and thought, wow, this is really balanced? But then you look at the label and it's like 16% or something crazy. And you're wow.
I'm actually really impressed when they can do that. Like when a winemaker can make a higher alcohol wine that still tastes in balance, I think that's good winemaking, frankly, because they're able to bring all those other textures and keep them in play and in balance with the alcohol and not make it taste like it's got a shot of vodka in there. It doesn't taste boozy. And I think that is a really talented winemaker behind that who can do that. for me.
So based on that, on the high end, have you ever tasted a wine and said, what is it? Is there any alcohol in there? You know what I mean? Have you tasted one and say, wow, this is a low alcohol wine?
I'm probably able to do that these days just because, I have a lot of experience and a pretty high tolerance. So I don't know if I'd necessarily be tasting a lower alcohol wine and be like, oh, wow, I can actually taste the alcohol.
And how would you, like if it's a white wine, because I have my way, when I'm tasting, I would describe that. How would you describe, if you taste a white wine, you feel it's low in alcohol, what would you say?
I don't know.
You don't say it's low alcohol,
No.
right? So that's what I'm just trying to get across is that we'll say it's high.
I don't know how I describe that, actually. How do you describe it? You said
if
you call
it's
it
like
light?
a white or even a red, I'll say it's watery.
Okay.
Because I'm not sensing alcohol, I'm not sensing fruit, but it's really probably to me more the alcohol. It tastes,
when I talk to people
water.
and they use the word watery, I assume that they're talking about tannic
Light.
structure, especially for reds. Like some people who are used to drinking big, heavy, oaky, like cabs or zins,
So
and
more
then
of a
and then they
body?
taste they taste a Pinot Noir, and they're like, oh, this is watery. I assume that they are talking about like what you just said, the body of the wine,
Easy
but
drinking.
Maybe I need to step back and consider that the feel of the alcohol does come into play for people as well.
I just think it's funny. We'll say if it's high, or they'll say hot if
Hot.
it's
I say hot.
alcoholic.
Yeah,
hot.
I
But
say hot or
we don't
boozy.
say cool if it's low,
No.
right? So it's one of those weird
I
terms.
like that. Thank you for listening today to The Wonderful World of Wine. We have been your hosts, Kim Simone and Mark Lenzi. We love that you visit with us every week. Please tune in to previous episodes that are listed on iTunes and tune back in next week. Cheers.